Greetings. Hello. I'm here today with my friend and co-author, Dr. Corinna Costello. And we thought it might be helpful for clinicians out there to have a little more information about our books. And they just came out this past September. The books being Creative Mindfulness Techniques for Clinical Trauma Work, Insights and Applications for Mental Health Practitioners. And then the other one, Healing from Clinical Trauma Using Creative Mindfulness Techniques, a workbook of tools and applications. So why don't we start out with some introductions? Corey, why don't you start and just tell us about yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Beth. I am Dr. Corinna Costello. I go by Corey. I am a licensed counselor in the state of North Carolina and in Illinois, a registered and board certified art therapist. And I've been practicing in the field for about 25 years, actually teaching for counseling at Northwestern. And one thing that, kind of came out of or where this project grew from was the fact that I work in a counseling program, and working with students and how to, they're always asking me the questions of how to utilize some creative processes in the work. And I thought about that of, well, how could we provide this kind of information to folks so they would be able to use it and use it effectively and safely with clients dealing with trauma. And I think that's the big part of all of this, is to make sure individuals know why they're using these techniques and make sure they're going about it the right way to support their clients to the best of their abilities. So that's really where this whole idea came from. We started off with the first book on more about the history of creativity and mindfulness and how, it looks at how I utilize it in my clinical work. And then the workbook, I was thrilled to have you, Beth and Short, join me in that writing adventure and really enhance, provide some clear-cut techniques and approaches for various populations and make it a usable technique, but a safe and effective approach. So that's where this all comes from. I've been writing about creativity and mindfulness for a while, wrote my dissertation on it, written a couple articles on it as well. So there's some evidence out there that I've been working on. What's interesting to me though is that it sounds, when we talk about mindfulness, it sounds so kind of not basic, but everybody can do it. It's a pretty easy and effective approach to do it, and everybody can say they do it. What I think we do is put it on paper, really. I put it out there as a way to help folks understand, why is it important? What does it do? How can they utilize it effectively, and take it from there? Yeah, that's me.
That's you. That's you.
That's me.
Yeah. Well, thanks for that nutshell. I'm Beth and Short, just
yes,
like
you are.
I said. I'm an art therapist here in Portland, Oregon. I'm also an artist, and I've been in practice since '99. And I went to Merrillhurst, which is now no more. And I'm also a board certified art therapist and licensed certified art therapist in our state of Oregon. And I've worked with families, individuals, and groups, history of working with lots of clients with complex trauma, a good 20 years working in foster care with children and adolescents, and working with mindfulness practices even with those folks. And then also I've worked in the LGBTQIA plus population for many years. And currently I'm also teaching, but I work for Lewis and Clark and Heritage University. I do both undergrad and grad courses in art therapy between those two. So, and yeah, same, Corey and I got to know each other many years ago, and we both have been interested in the mindfulness practice In 2017, I wrote a book that I self-published, Creative Wellness, Art Journaling with Mindfulness. And then recently with this project, I did my Creative Mindfulness Treatment Deck, which we can talk about later or in a different video. So again, similar to you, I feel like the mindfulness practice has been huge, and it's in many cultures, and of course I know that we touch on where it comes from, and we appreciate it in both of our books for where that idea of mindfulness comes from. There's also mindfulness practice in Indigenous culture, and I think for me too, I just wanted to share my version of how I practice, and you and I had such similar thoughts in how we did this work. So
right. So I'm thrilled that we're able to work together and talk about this project. And as you were saying, one thing that I think about is that the use of creativity and the use of mindfulness really kind of culture is a huge part of that process and practice. And so really like understanding that when we're working with our clients, when we're trying to support individuals, especially in the experiences related to trauma, they're going to experience it from their own narrative. And so finding ways to help in that process, I think, is just incredibly important.
Right, and connect with them with all their intersections and meet them where they are, and
Right.
really have a relationship that has equity in it, and not any kind of a power dynamic. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think that we think we're creating the wheel here. Yes, there's been other mindfulness practices in art therapy. There was the focusing oriented expressive arts, and there was also the MBAT, mindfulness based art therapy. And I think for me, I think there are really important things that come from those two approaches, but I felt like it wasn't quite what I was doing. And so I feel like, yes, we also honor and appreciate where those folks came from, but also, just kind of made it work for us. What are your thoughts on that?
I appreciate you saying that, because and that's one thing about this topic. As I've done research in regards to this topic, yes, there are authors that have been engaging in that work and talking about it, and it just was a little bit different from how I know I practice and how I know of your work, and I just thought it was that important that we get it out there. That is how evidence-based work kind of really enhances the field, is that folks add to it, and that's really where this idea and this concept comes from. This is a topic, and I think about this topic, since my dissertation, that I've been trying to figure this topic out for about 10-15 years, and even now, as I'm engaging in this, it still changes and morphs a little bit. So, which I appreciate. I enjoy, as a matter of fact, as an approach to working with individuals. So,
yeah, and I think that change and evolution is so important. It's not just one way, and we're experiencing the speed of life with our clients, and so for that evolution, I think it's quite natural and makes sense. We don't want to be stuck in ways that maybe are not appropriate, or resting on structures that aren't appropriate for the practice.
Yeah.
So.
And recognizing too, in the work that we engage in with working with clients of trauma, what that impact is on their physical and physiological selves, right? We recognize that that's part of this process. And as I've been thinking about this topic over time, one thing that really stands out to me is that it should be celebrated a little bit more, that there is change happening. You know, when I first got into the world of art therapy, and I talk about this in the book, I remember sitting at a art therapy conference, and they were showing up on the big screen. They were showing what was happening to a client's brain while they were making art. And it was a moment. It was a power. I still talk about it. It was a powerful moment in which all of us knew. We were sitting there and we're like, yeah, we know that that's happening. We know change is occurring. And now we can start to see, we have evidence to support it, right? You can do brain scans. That wasn't always the case. We knew creativity. We knew changing focus and concentration and mindfulness terms. We could cause a change in the brain. That's huge.
That's huge.
Right? So the fact is, we could just support it now with some more evidence, which is great.
Right, right. I wonder if maybe you could shift into talking a little bit more about the first book, and what a person might expect having that book.
Sure. You know what, this topic is near and dear to my heart, and it's kind of taking a look at how we as clinicians, and it doesn't spell out any one type of clinician, but a clinician who's working with folks that are dealing with trauma or engaged in that process of the interpersonal connection. So, thinking about, well, what is necessary for my client to, as far as treatment planning and approach to working through the trauma and making some forward progress, building wellness and resiliency and strength-based approaches, and various professionals engage in that work, right? So the idea of this is that, what could it look like in the clinical setting? What could we do with this work, and why is it important? So we talk about creativity and mindfulness as an actual technique, as an approach to working with our clients, right? We can engage some aspects of creativity. We can engage some aspects of mindfulness. And as we're merging those in the clinical and the therapeutic process, we can create some change, right? And I think that that's really important and powerful to know that, and to recognize, what and how that could look. So through that first book, we talk about what does trauma look like, and what is that experience of when somebody goes through trauma moment, or longer term trauma exposure, what that could look like, what that does to the body and the brain, right? From a neurophysiological standpoint, it creates change. We know that, right? We recognize that we can tie it back into, and this was a part I was thrilled with getting into more of the history of the human of the human experience, right? Taking a look at early life, early humanoid experiences. It was really based on survival. That's really the whole gist of it, was to protect oneself. So the central nervous system would become activated as a way to protect, right? Whether you fought or fight, flight, freeze, or fold, your central nervous system would activate based on that particular situation, and it would override some of your cognitive prefrontal thinking about what's going on, and your nervous system activates, your limbic region, your hypothalamus, everything gets going and does something to protect oneself in a trauma moment. Mm-hmm. That happens, and that is part of our human experience. It doesn't mean it's always traumatic, but it does mean that that's part of our neurophysiological experience. Mm-hmm. Now, where the damage can come in is long-term, right? You have a long-term kind of experience, or the impact is so great that the individual can't get back to what we call allostasis. They can't get back to baseline. right? So this nervous system activation, which is supposed to happen, gets us where we need to go in that moment, but can be very consequential in the long term on individuals. Really, the focus that I put into this was, what can we do with that? How could we engage in work? So when I think about as an art therapist and as a counselor, when I compare the two, and I think about the two different roles that I may sometimes play in my verbal, cognitive, and I'm psychodynamic by training, right? And my verbal, cognitive, psychodynamic approach, I can help talk through certain things with clients. We can get so far. But when we start using other techniques, other approaches, creativity, mindfulness, we're altering the neurophysiology of the brain. We're doing something different. And we go deeper. And we know that. So this is really just taking a look at that of what can be done differently. How could you incorporate this? You know, looking at what change occurs in the brain, in the central nervous system, what kinds of clinical mental health stress reduction techniques might, have others used? How might we incorporate that, or what might ours look like? And then really focusing on getting to a point of resiliency on this. And then from my vantage point, I looked at various examples of using creative mindfulness techniques, using it with supervision with counselors, using it in art therapy, using it in journaling, trying it out in different venues to kind of see what happens and how clients respond to it. So that's where that first book really, that was the focus of it. And then what I was really just thrilled about was having you take it from there and go, here are some more, let's expand on this. Here are some more different approaches to that. So you'd like to tell us about book number 2?
Sure. So, I really appreciate how you put such depth into your research around the brain. I feel like our books work well together because it's not reiterating everything. It's not the same information twice. And so with my vantage, we really looked at exploring activities, mindfulness approaches, and art-based exercises. And they're very accessible, and they're great for use with clients, supervision, individual work, group work, self-care, therapist self-care, which is a huge piece. When you're working with so many clients that have trauma, it's hard to not be vicariously traumatized yourself. And so, the second book is really full of strength-based tools that incorporate the creative mindfulness technique, which is what it's called now, right? The CMT. And so it's incorporating the CMT into clinical practice. And I did talk a lot about ethical scope of practice, ensuring that clinicians do consider the depth of their own training when implementing. And, if people aren't an art therapist, really important to make sure to get, use those CEUs, get more training on something that you want to explore more. Maybe you don't want to get a second master's, but it's really important to still do ethical work within your scope of practice. The book is full of lots of activities. There's a whole chapter with guided meditations. I really enjoy writing those. And I have some clients who, the beginning of our sessions, we do a check-in, and I kind of get a feel for where they're at. And I've gotten really into a good practice of being able to create a mindfulness meditation on the spot to help them in a guided meditation. And then they do some response art, even all on telehealth doing it. But so that we've got these guided meditations, the chapters explore attachment and art therapy and how they work together, how art therapy is kind of a whole nother transitional object, and that process, not just the art. And I think that's a big piece of art therapy. And there's a section on multicultural considerations when using art with clients, and really being mindful, not to use that word again, but to be mindful and using the appropriate media and uh, art prompts that are fitting, because you need to consider that before suggesting a prompt that might actually trigger somebody into another place, uh, which might not be constructive, might be actually regressive to treatment. Um, I talk about mindfulness in it and kind of unpack that a little more as far as where it comes from, the idea of mindfulness, the technique from Buddhism. I also talked about the 8 dimensions of wellness and how we live in those 8 dimensions of wellness, and how we can use mindfulness in that practice of finding balance between those. And that is also from my first book, but a little more depth on that in this publication. And then, of course, an overview of how to use the CMT, specifically with clients that have trauma, complex trauma. Sometimes, we also talk in this. I also talked in this book about anxiety, low self-esteem. So there's sections on all of these different appropriate comorbid diagnoses that might be applicable to use the CMT. And then, of course, activities. There's so many. I really enjoy coming up with art prompts that are specific to a person. And so knowing, these activities were very thoughtful. The ones that around addiction, I did think about the 12 steps created in AA, and came up with some specific prompts that might support AA work and might be really helpful in working with their individual counselor. Yeah, and so, it's really specifically for lots of different people, clients with trauma, of course, but anxiety, depression, addiction, stress, problems with self-worth, and again, for clinicians and their own wellness. And yeah, well, we've definitely explored both books and talked about what folks might encounter and how to use them, and how they're different but work together. Are there any other thoughts, Corey, that you have that would be good to share with folks before we close up for today?
Yeah, as I was, thinking about what we were talking about, I just think about how important our work is that we engage in with clients, with folks dealing with whatever issues that they're dealing with. So I recognize that there's huge value in our process, our interpersonal connection to the individuals we're working with. And the intention and the goal with all of this was to really provide a supportive approach, a supportive document, a supportive, just put it into writing so people can use it as it fits their particular situation, understanding how and why it might fit and what they might need to do in order to make it fit. And recognizing what those goals are for assisting clients. So that part, I'm just thrilled with how it all came out. And in the examples that we use are real examples. I mean, that this is real work that we engage in, and the power and the sometimes the beauty. A lot of times there's beauty in that, even if there's
in that transformation that we can see, for sure.
Yeah, exactly. So I recognize, and I think we both recognize the impact of this work, and we're looking at this from a lens of how do we make it available to others in a manner that's safe and effective, right? And given folks some different ideas on that. So I'm really just so happy with how it turned out, and having worked with you.
Yes, agree. It was definitely a labor of love, and it kept us busy during the pandemic.
Oh my gosh, yes. Yes.
Well, if you're interested in getting the books, you can find details here below in our YouTube description. Also, you can visit the Taylor and Francis website, or it's on Amazon now too. It's all over.
There you go.
So,
Oh, and did you want to say something about those cards that you created?
yeah, sure. Well, and there is a separate video that's going to come out about the cards, but I'll just show you. They're my Creative Mindfulness Treatment Deck, and these are another tool that can be used in treatment. They're chock full of art that I made, and each one has some kind of a prompt, kind of a thought-provoking piece of art on it, and they can be used in session when folks don't have words, because sometimes people don't have words for what's going on for them. And so these cards can be something somebody might just kind of be looking through while you're talking, and then they might find a card that resonates for them, and that might create some conversation. And then in that, after that conversation, some response art. So some opportunities for mindfulness with the card, with the thoughts, response art, and then more conversation where words might come. So yeah, thanks for letting me share those.
Oh, yeah, definitely, definitely.
Yeah, and those cards you can get on my website, bethanshort.com. So,
Beautiful.
all right. Well, thanks for taking time today to meet and to talk about the books. And if anybody has questions, feel free to reach out, and we'll do our best to answer those.
It was great talking with you. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.